was a great experience last Sabbath. Kind of would have been nice if today's weather had been last Sabbath's weather. But what a great day together. So, the Bible says the human heart is desperately wicked and corrupt. Who can explain it? So I'm going to blame that on what I did. I was sitting with my nephew. I don't know how old he was, 5, something like that. Blue. We're having this conversation. And something happened. I said, I'm going to try something with Blue. So I said to Blue, Blue, your epidermis is showing. Blue immediately looked down and said to me, it is not. And I said, well, it is. No, it isn't showing. I said, well, okay. So, and by the way, when you leaned forward and looked, I could see you've got garments on your back. He said, I don't have garments on my back. Started swiping at his back, trying to see if he had, I don't have any garments on my back. I said, well, you do, but that's all right because all your ancestors had garments on their back. Do you know you have ancestors? He said, I don't have ancestors. I said, actually, you do have some. By now, he was getting pretty agitated. And so I thought, okay, I got to back out of this somehow. And so I said, hey, don't worry about it. Just calm down. Your dad told me last night you slumbered in your bed, and you'll probably slumber in your bed again tonight, and everything will be okay. Well, at that point in the conversation, he bit me. And so I thought, okay, well, we probably need to leave this conversation behind. Now, I know after Anthem today, somebody's come up to me today and is going to say, how could you? What kind of person are you to do that to your nephew? I have repented. Let me just be clear. I have repented. Especially the last time I saw Blue in Texas, he's now 6'5", weighs about 240. I really repented. I said, no. Nothing wrong here, Blue. We're all good. And he was good. But I tell you that story today to say simply this. If you're going to have a conversation with somebody, it's a pretty good idea to make sure you've defined your terms. Define your key terms so that you both know what you're talking about. So we're entering this series, A Word to the Wise, a series that is based in the wisdom literature of the Old Testament, the book of Proverbs to be specific. So it seems to me we need to define 4 terms because people can kind of confuse these terms and not be certain of exactly what Proverbs is referring to. So 4 terms I want to quickly define. The terms are knowledge, intelligence, IQ, and wisdom. It's easy to get those 4 terms overlapped and a bit uncertain about how they're different. So I decided, okay, let me sit down. I sat down at my computer and I decided, okay, I'm going to do the best I can to define these for myself first. So I typed out how I could define each of those terms. And then I said, okay, now I've done that. I think I have a grasp on it. Let me look at the dictionary. So I went to the dictionary, added those pieces, then sat down with my friend AI and said, AI, how do you define these terms? And by the way, AI has got a lot of knowledge. I don't know how much intelligence, and I really question his wisdom. But anyway, so he added some things to it as well. So what came out of that is my kind of drawing together of all these different pieces. It's not perfect, but maybe it will help us begin to define the terms. So I would define knowledge as what I know, those facts, those realities, those truths about life. In fact, I discovered that a fairly common definition of knowledge is justified true belief. Justified true belief. That's knowledge. Knowledge is something we all have. Knowledge is something that can grow. We're on a university campus. I hope knowledge is something that can grow. Intelligence. Intelligence somehow has to do with innate capabilities and capacities to do something with the knowledge we have. To be able to sort through situations, to understand them, maybe to understand them quickly, to decide which is the best choice of 2 or 3 different options. It tends to be more innate. In fact, there's a debate as to whether or not we can actually sharpen our intelligence to some degree. That's intelligence. IQ. IQ is the number you're given when you take a test that tests things like memory and perception and problem-solving skills, that tests that and then compares you to others who have taken the same test and gives you a number and says, this is your IQ. And then there's wisdom. What is wisdom? Seems to me that wisdom has a lot to do with what I do with all of those realities, but in addition to that, it has to do with how I choose to live my life. And in particular, when we're talking about the wisdom literature of Scripture, how I choose to do that under the sovereignty, the love, and the domain of God. In fact, there was a good definition of wisdom just last week. Any of you who are students who might have been in chapel heard Dr. Hart speak, excellent presentation. At one point, he defined wisdom. And when he did, I immediately wrote it into my phone because I thought that's a good definition. Here was Dr. Hart's definition of wisdom. Wisdom is applying your knowledge to life experiences. Wisdom is applying your knowledge to life experiences. So, quick summary. Knowledge, what I know. Intelligence, how well I process. IQ, how I compare to others. And wisdom, how I decide and act and live. So our focus in this series is on the last one, on wisdom. Now we're focusing on wisdom for two reasons. The first reason is the series is based on the book of Proverbs, part of the wisdom literature of Scripture. And Proverbs is focused on wisdom. Proverbs describes wisdom. It defines wisdom. It calls people to wisdom. It praises wisdom. It says above everything else you do in life, get wisdom. Proverbs is all about wisdom. So naturally, if we're going to take from the book of Proverbs lessons, we have to be concerned about wisdom. That's the first reason. That's our focus in this series. But there's a second reason it's our focus in this series. And that reason is this. As I look around our world, our culture, I have begun to wonder at times if we are not bereft of wisdom. Has wisdom totally abandoned us? Just as I see what goes on, how we deal with each other, how our leaders conduct themselves, is there any wisdom left? If we need anything, we need wisdom. So I'm going to ask you a question. At first I thought maybe I'll ask them to raise their hands because it has to do if you know a certain type of person, raise their hand. And I thought, no, I don't want to do that because then, people turn to their neighbor and say, who'd you think about? And then it gets awkward. So I said, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands. But I am going to ask you if a face comes to mind with this question. Can you think of a person who by making foolish choices, not much else than that, just by making some foolish choices, basically destroyed their life? Can you think of a person who by making foolish choices basically destroyed their lives? I'm going to guess that for somebody, a face came to mind, a man, kind of had it all. Marriage, family, kids, good, all the good things, went out drinking one night, had a one-night stand, his wife found out, destroyed his life. Now his family, his marriage, his life is rage-filled shambles all around him. Blew up his life. Somebody else may have thought of a young woman struggling to get by, heard, I can make a lot of money online. Decided to try it. She did. Except now she's finding that digital trail will follow her and follow her and follow her. Destroyed her life. Somebody else thought of a man in a financial tight spot at work, saw some opportunities, cooked the books, ended up frying his life, lost his job. Now he doesn't know what he's going to do, where he's going to turn. Blew up his life. So maybe you thought of somebody like that. If you did, I'm going to hazard a guess. In each of those or 1,000 other examples, what was missing was not knowledge. They had ample knowledge already and available to them. Wasn't intelligence. These can be very bright people. Wasn't IQ. They scored higher than you and I might have scored maybe. But what was missing was wisdom. Wisdom to think through the realities of life and how life works. Wisdom. So that's why we're going to Proverbs. Wisdom. A word to the wise. A word to the wise is an old saying that simply means if you're a wise person, you hear this word, you'll recognize it and do something about it. So we're going to have 4 words to the wise in this series: friendship, listening, boundaries, and love. Today we begin with friendship. Today's word to the wise is friendship. Now maybe you'll say to me, Randy, it doesn't take wisdom to recognize that we need friends. It doesn't take wisdom to recognize that friendship is an important reality of our lives. Well, I appreciate you saying that. You're right. It doesn't take wisdom to recognize its value. I mean, all you need to do is just look around at how people live their lives, and those who tend to do well tend to be those who have good relationships. Or you might even go online and check out, have there been any studies on this? If you did that, you would quickly find that the Harvard study of adult development is one of the longest longitudinal studies ever done. It began in 1938, and it is still underway. All these decades later. One of the key findings of that Harvard study is this: the quality of your life, as well as your ability to age well, is dependent on the quality of your relationships. Relationships is one of the most important realities in our lives, according to that study. In fact, the quality, the caliber of our relationships is more important than smarts, IQ, or any of the other things that you might think would be important in deciding how to live a good life. The quality, the texture of our relationships. So you're right, it doesn't take wisdom to decide that. Just have to have a little knowledge, a little intelligence, you can find it. Here's the problem. That's not always the way we live in our hectic, harried, hurried world. Pastor by the name of Michael Woodruff speaks about that. Listen to Woodruff's words. Americans are good at many things, he says, but being friends and sharing life is not one of them. Our iconic figures, as Americans, our iconic figures, the cowboy, the police detective, always seem to ride alone. They can't be slowed down by a partner. I first realized how narrowly most Americans view friendships when I was traveling with a Brazilian leader. He'd started a thriving seminary, planted a church, written books. The man makes things happen. As we were driving from one meeting to another, I said, "Hey, do you want a cup of coffee?" He said, "Really? We have time?" Wow. I'm honored. That would be great. I'm thinking, I don't understand why he's so thrilled. I quickly pulled into a drive-through coffee stand and he says, "You Americans, I feel sorry for you. I thought you were asking to be my friend. I thought we were going to go sit together and share life. You want a cup of coffee? Can we truly be friends? Take time." We know we need friends. It doesn't take any great wisdom. But do we make that choice and live that life? Wisdom comes into play. But it's even more specific than that. The proverb for today, just one proverb, is going to outline, underline, and speak to us about one specific kind of friendship or one specific aspect of friendship that is even more challenging. Now, Proverbs has a lot to say about friends. Proverbs will say things like, a friend loves in all circumstances, in all kinds of weather. In other words, friends aren't just fair weather. It says a friend overlooks or covers over offenses and wrongs. In other words, doesn't make a big deal about every last thing. It says a friend will sometimes stick closer than a sibling will. It has a lot of good things to say about friends. I've chosen one in Proverbs chapter 27. Just one verse. You're going to have to listen because it's one verse long. If you blink, you'll miss it. Very brief verse, but listen to what it says, Proverbs 27:6. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. I love how the Good News translation renders it. Friends mean well even when they hurt you, but when an enemy puts an arm around your shoulder, watch out. Wounds from a friend can be trusted. Seems to me that what it's saying is not just speaking about friendship in general, but speaking specifically to this bottom line reality. Every one of us needs a few friends. It can't be many. We don't have the capacity to have that many of these kinds of friends. But every one of us needs a very small cadre, maybe 2 or 3, small cadre of friends who can tell us the truth, as painful as it is, from whom we can hear that truth, and to whom we can tell the truth, as scary as that is, and who can hear it from us. Every one of us needs that quality of friendship in 2 or 3 people in our life. Can speak the truth even though it's painful. Can hear the truth even though it's painful. Wounds from a friend can be trusted. Now, I want to suggest to you that to develop that kind of friendship, to have that kind of friendship, requires something that I like to call relational permission. Relational permission. Most of the people you know, acquaintances and friends, church members, colleagues, etc., do not have with you the kind of relational permission required to speak truly hard things into your life. If you have people that are just going around speaking hard things into people's life, everybody avoids them. Nobody wants anything to do with them. That's not a good quality to have. But if you're going to have that kind of friendship that has the strength to hold up under truth-telling that can be painful, you need relational permission. What that means is you need to know their heart, to trust their heart. To know that if you're going through bad times, they'll be there with you. If they're going to hear that from you, they need to know about you, that if they're going through tough situations, you'll be there with them. And that when you've made a fool of yourself, they don't believe you've done a permanent job of it. They'll be there for you and with you in those circumstances. Relational permission. How is that developed? It's developed by spending time together, doing life together, enjoying laughter together, being together when you have tears, working through some hard stuff, enjoying some blessings together, worshiping together, playing together, praying together, weeping together. All of those realities build the strength of a relationship that can bear wounds. One quick example. I think about this in terms, for example, of a blended family. Let's say you have a blended family. One parent has 2 or 3 kiddos that are still a bit younger. A new parent steps into that family. That new parent does not have relational permission to do discipline with those kids. The only reason discipline has a chance of working between a parent and a child is because that child knows no matter how angry they get, no matter how many times they slam the door and scream, "I hate you," they have the conviction in their heart of hearts that that parent loves them. They just know they're loved. And so the fact that they know they're loved gives that parent relational permission to speak hard things into their lives. You take that element away and have a new person step in and start trying to speak those hard things into their lives, the only thing it feels like is cruelty. Just cruelty. Get out of my face. I don't want anything to do with you. You haven't shown me your heart for me. You don't have permission to say those kinds of things to me. Relational permission. And it functions both ways. Sometimes it's needing to have the friends who can say that to us. Sometimes it's things that we need to say to friends. I was about, 14, 15 years old at the time. We were at church one Sabbath, the church my dad pastored, and we had a guest speaker. It was between Sabbath school and church. That church had Sabbath school and then church. And right between those, people were milling around in the lobby, a group getting ready for worship and so forth. And a woman sees me and says to me, Randy, come here. So I go over to her. I knew her. And she said, see that guy right over there? And I said, yeah. She said, he's our guest pastor today. I said, yeah, I know. My dad invited him. She said, you need to go tell him something. I said, what do I need to go tell him? She said, please go tell him his zipper is down. And I'm like, what? I'm not going to go tell him his zipper is down. You go tell him. I can't tell him that. I can't. You're the pastor's son. You go tell him that. And she walks off into the crowd. And I'm like, what? I'm not going to tell him that. And so our guest pastor that day stood up and preached with his zipper down. I wasn't going to tell him that. Now, fortunately, in those days, you had a pulpit, so he was largely covered. But I mean, wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. When I read, I thought, I wonder what I would have done if I was an enemy. You know what I'd have done? I'd gone up to him and said, man, you look good. That's a great suit on you. Don't stand behind that pulpit, man. Stand out there where they can see you. That's an enemy. I had no relational, I'm this age, he's this age. I'm not going to say that to him. True friendship will require those kinds of things at times. Sometimes it's very simple. Man, I hate to tell you, you got some spinach caught in your teeth, That's pretty simple. But what about, do you have a friend to whom you would actually say, dude, I love you, man. We've been through a lot together. I just got to tell you, I've seen sometimes just recently, the way you speak to and treat your wife, man, you may want to look at that. Could you hear that from a friend? Could you say that to a friend? Wounds from a friend can be trusted. Harry Truman. Harry Truman, president decades ago, has been referred to as the accidental president. When I first saw that term, I thought, what are you talking? How do you become president by accident? Accidental president. Well, the way it happened was this. FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the longest serving president in U.S. history, had just been elected for the fourth time, was in office. World War II was moving toward its conclusion. For this last run, he had chosen Harry Truman as his running mate, as his VP. Harry Truman was VP for 82 days, and Roosevelt died rather suddenly. Roosevelt had kept him at an arm's distance, had not included him in a lot of things. For example, Truman had no idea there was something called the Manhattan Project, developing the atomic bomb. He's going to have to make decisions about how to bring World War II to a conclusion. Suddenly, this accidental president is in this situation, is like, He would later say, I felt in that moment like the sun, the moon, and all the planets had just caved in on top of me. Can you imagine that? What you would need at that point in time more than maybe anything else is a friend, a true friend, and he had one. A man named Sam Rayburn. Sam Rayburn was Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, the longest serving speaker in U.S. history, even to this day. Democrat from Texas. Sam Rayburn, good old homeboy. He and Harry Truman were friends. After Truman became president, this is what Rayburn said to Truman. From here on out, Harry, you're going to have lots of people around you. They'll try to put up a wall around you and cut you off from any ideas but theirs. They're going to tell you what a great man you are, Harry, but you and I both know you ain't. Do you know what? That's a gift. Because that says to Truman as president, here is a man who will tell me the truth. This is someone I can trust. Wounds from a friend can be trusted. But an enemy multiplies kisses. What friend do you have? What friends do you have like that in your life? If someone else is hearing this question, will they answer that question with your name? Gordon MacDonald, speaker, author, administrator, writing and speaking about prophets, says something that I want to read to you because it struck me as I read through this. This isn't describing just prophets. This is describing friends. So I'll include that word as well. Here's what he writes. One time, 20 or so years ago, I was in Japan on a speaking tour with a close personal friend. He was a number of years older than I was. As we walked down the street in Yokohama, Japan, the name of a common friend came up, and I said something unkind about that person. It was sarcastic, it was cynical, it was a put down. My older friend stopped, turned, and faced me until his face was right in front of mine. With deep words, he said, "Gordon, a man who says he loves God would not say something like that about a friend." He could have put a knife into my ribs and the pain wouldn't have been any less. He did what a prophet, what a friend does. But you know something? There have been 10,000 times in the last 20 or so years that I have been saved from making a jerk of myself by remembering his words. When I've been tempted to say something unkind about a brother or sister, I hear my friend's voice say, "Gordon, a man who says he loves God would not speak in such a way about a friend." Prophets do that. Friends do that. They remind us of the truth and of where we're falling short. If you avoid prophets, if you avoid friends, and a lot of people do, you do so at the peril of your own spiritual journey. You and I need prophets. You and I need friends. So the proverb says, wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. So who are those people in your life? You can't have a long list. We just don't have that kind of capacity for that type of investment. But can you name 2 people, 3 people? Would somebody naming 2 or 3 people name you in their life? You know, one of the great texts, it's just 1 verse long, for me in the New Testament, is found in the Gospel of John. It's in those chapters where we see the heart of Jesus on display like we see it in no other place. Here we see his heart, chapter after chapter, including almost a full chapter just of his prayer. We see his heart. He's speaking to his disciples. You're his disciple. I'm his disciple. He's speaking to us. Here's what he says in John 15, verse 15. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I've called you friends. For everything I learned from my Father, I have made known to you. I no longer call you servants. I call you friends. I don't know about that. That's a precious thought to me, that I can say Jesus is my friend, but more than that, that he would say, Randy's my friend. But you know what? Jesus says some hard things to his friends. He says, when you're building your life, it's going to be easier and quicker to build it on sand. But when the storm comes, and it will, it'll be catastrophe. He says, stop judging each other. Stop judging. Stop. Stop trying to reach over and yank the speck out of your friend's eye when you can't even reach their eye because of the beam sticking out of your own. He says, beware, beware. He doesn't say that often. He says, beware when everyone speaks well of you. He says, when everyone likes you, beware. Why would he say that? Because he follows it up by saying, because that's how they speak of false prophets. In other words, if everybody likes you, something may be false, because anybody that stands for anything is going to have some enemies. He says that to his friends. What would he say if he stood here today talking to these friends, to me? Maybe he would say to a friend who spoke in really vile ways about a neighbor who loves Donald Trump. Maybe he would speak to a friend who spoke in really nasty ways about a colleague who hates Donald Trump. Maybe he would speak to all of us and say, friends, in my kingdom there's an ethic. And that ethic is this: love your enemies. Pray for them. That's hard stuff to hear. Hard. But he has the relational permission to say it because he loves us with an everlasting love. You know what it takes on our part to hear that? It takes wisdom. Not knowledge, not intelligence, not IQ, all of which are important. But those won't help you hear. What it really requires here to function, to live in those kinds of friendships, including with Jesus, is true wisdom. So I hope as you leave this place today, you'll leave thinking, who are those people in my life? Am I that person in someone else's life? And then just praying, God, make me that kind of person. Give me that kind of wisdom, that I might live and walk like Jesus. Amen.